I must say that you're taking us to the jazz concert. The Emmett Cohen concert on Monday was magic. Uh,
Truly.
I was, my feet and my hands, everything was going with the rhythm.
Yeah, I love being able to facilitate things like that, and now, of course, jazz musicians, all the clubs are closed, and they need something to do, some place to play, and so I love it that I can, since I know most of the guys on the scene, I know the shows that I think people will like. And so to do that periodically every couple of weeks, to have members from my site go and come and hang out at my house for a little while, hang out at my house virtually, and then go up to a club or a Harlem apartment or a basement in Brooklyn and check out some guys playing is just really special.
Well, I'm going to hang out with you.
Hey, it's a party. That's what people have been saying that because I go out usually about 5 nights a week for the jazz scene here in New York. I think New York, well, up until a couple months ago, was experiencing an amazing renaissance where there were just jazz clubs all over, and this really is the mecca for jazz, and there are incredible musicians playing every night in multiple venues around the city. So to have access to that is great. And just like with my site now, people have access to my classes and they can be in their home. They can be in their home in California. They can be in their home anywhere. You can also go to a jazz club in Harlem, even if you live in France or you live in
Right.
Australia. It's available now. You can actually do that. So it's really making the world a smaller place where the better aspects of the culture, of all cultures, can be brought to fore.
I think so too. Well, tomorrow, because I used to have an office on Long Island in
Uh,
Suffolk County, I'm invited to the town hall of the Suffolk County AG.
aha.
And I have been attending his town halls since the pandemic started. And this is a very interesting guy. And so I'm going to introduce Feldenkrais to the crowd there. There are usually about 500 or 600 people who tune in at about 5 o'clock.
Aha.
And he is doing exactly what I think Black Lives Matter is talking about.
Hmm.
What he has are posters for domestic abuse, for suicide prevention hotlines, for opioid addiction, or whatever. And what happens is it filters through the police department, and they are partnering with different counselors and social services to help people. So I sounds to me like it's a good way to go.
I think that is the only way to go. Police clearly are not trained to deal with what are social problems or mental illness. That's not, you don't need to have somebody who doesn't have that kind of training and who does have a gun and who has a different kind of training where their training is really about subjugating people as opposed to finding them help. I don't. I mean, there are obviously many police officers we know are going over the line, and it's
Yeah.
a disaster. But I think others simply are not trained and should not be responsible for these kinds of things. They can partner with organizations, but organizations where they know how to deal with opioid addiction, they know how to deal with schizophrenia, they know how to deal with problems of that sort. That's really who should be dealing with it. And then if the police need to be involved, then that's another story. But to have someone drunk in their car falling asleep on a fast food line, that's not what the person's supposed to do. You're not supposed to fall asleep when you're online. But it's outrageous to end up dead. How do you end up dead under those circumstances? How do you end up dead?
Yeah.
That's just how do you end up dead? I mean, how could you? How could it possibly be that? And how could it not? How can it escalate to that point? And so there's a lot of work we need to do as a country in
As a
terms of
country,
it.
yes. And as people, I guess what we need to do is mobilize every individual for
Mhm.
being aware of themselves, their limitations, their abilities, and acknowledging it. Because as I've learned, it's not necessarily that you complete the process. It's that you get the learning experience along the way that moves you one step closer to whatever that flexibility or notion of perfection may be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think that requires a deep and very mature reflecting to look at yourself and to see what's going on, to see what's happening inside yourself. That requires that you really look at yourself. We have such deep-seated uh, impressions of how we relate to the world. I remember reading in Nelson Mandela's autobiography that while as a young man in South Africa, he saw a Caucasian person in distress, and he felt like he needed to run over to help that person. He said, "Well, wait a minute. I'm an African, and there's so many Africans in distress, and I don't do anything like that for them. But my programming is such that that's not supposed to take place, and therefore I do that." And that's Nelson Mandela. Uh, I know. I mean, I'll give another example. There was a fellow who is very progressive who talked about going on United Airlines and flying, and he noticed that both of the pilots were Black.
Hmm.
His instinct was, "Oh my gosh, I wonder if they know how to fly the plane."
Oh my God.
And he said, "Wait a minute, that's ridiculous. How could they possibly have, why would United Airlines have pilots that don't know how to fly the plane? That doesn't even make any sense." However, his instinct was, if there isn't a white person in charge, there's going to be a problem. And similarly, if there's a white person and it's a white police officer and the white person's falling asleep and holding up the traffic line, I think it goes to the place of saying, "Hey, buddy, like, come on, wake up. What are you doing?" There's a camaraderie there, and that person isn't seen as other. That
That's right.
person is seen as part of, come on, like, hey, look, first of all, you've had too much to drink. You shouldn't be behind the wheel of a car. Let's get it together and buddy, as opposed to let me escalate to the point where where somebody dies. It's crazy.
It is absolutely. I know, right. I live on the Upper West Side like you do, but I'm right opposite Lincoln Center. And I guess this was about 3 years ago. I was walking across the Meridian to go to Alice Tully Hall. And this was middle of the day. And a very good looking, well dressed African American young man was also walking across. A policeman spotted him. I really can't tell you if the policeman was white or black. I don't remember.
Mhm.
I can only say that he accosted him, and I stayed there on the Meridian. And I said, "Why are you stopping him? He looks like he probably just came from ABC or one of the studios." And he said, "No, he matches a description, and he of some sort." So I stood there and I said, "Well, I'm not leaving him until I know everything's okay." And I stood there, and it's like, here I am, all 5 feet of me.
Yeah.
But I was prepared to stay, and he did. He put the young man's hand behind his back. And I said, "It's quite obvious what he's got in his pocket." I said, "It looks like a wallet." So he did. He looked at the wallet, and then eventually he let him go. But by the time I left, there were 5 other people standing on the Meridian
Mhm.
with me, making sure that everything was okay.
Well, I think that new technology. I was hearing something yesterday. I guess it was yesterday on the news that the technology of television showing what was happening in the South in the '60s, that changed the texture of the conversation. Because people say, "Oh my God, look at what's happening," and now with everyone with cell phones videotaping what's going on, that technology is changing what's the ability of police officers to go across the line without accountability. And so and you see what's happening globally. People responding because they see it. They go, "Oh my gosh, this is people being murdered for whatever, often for nothing."
And
Yeah.
you're right, and it's a global problem.
Mhm.
Evidently, it's not just limited here. I do a Periscope program now under a new name, under my the Voice of Joyce name. It used to be at Grandma J. Silva. And so I have a global audience. And when I was speaking on Tuesday, they said to me, "We'd like to hear what you have to say." And they listed a whole bunch of subjects. And I said, education, prisons, healthcare, whatever. And I said, "Sure, I'm happy to give you whatever my views are." And I said, "Do you want me to do it on next Tuesday at 11 or Thursday?" I said, "I could come back tomorrow." So they said, "No, we would like to see you on Thursday because you're raising global issues."
Beautiful. Mhm.
And so I said, "Okay, I'll do that." And so we'll see what happens, because what's happening here is not an isolated case. It's happening all over. When we really do need to come together, I think, as a planet. We can't afford to be isolated, because what affects us in one section of our globe affects us in the other. So that's my 2 cents.
It sounds like more than 2 cents. It sounds like good stuff.
It's a pleasure. It has been an absolute pleasure.